So good afternoon. Welcome to Icon 100. All of you, I believe I have like 3 disparate groups. If you can mute yourselves, it will be of a great help. I'm always of a habit of muting, but you guys will insist on unmuting yourself. I don't know what happens. If you can mute on your part, I've muted, but please endeavor to keep it that way, muted. So as I was saying, I believe we are having about 3 groups, 3 or 4. I believe we have 2 biomeds. We have food and nutrition, and I think we have one other group that escapes me right now, like nitawakumbuka, not to worry. So maybe 3 or 4 groups in total. So without any further ado, and I have been engaging your class reps for the last 2 weeks actually or so. And I think we have come to some basic understandings about my expectations about the course and your expectations on the same. I'll just put my video very briefly so that you can see who you are dealing with. It's not like I'm a ghost or something. And maybe this is the last time I'll do it. The other times you'll just be hearing a voice and not maybe necessarily having to deal with a video. So I'm Mr. Nyanjong. I've been teaching this course for quite a while and I like it. If for the only reason that ni course ambayo inanipatia changamoto in terms of how do you teach people who are not subject specialists in that area to at least have an appreciation of what economics is all about. And that's the challenge that I normally take up every semester for the last, I think, 13 years. And I think the results are not so badly off. So I'm always very encouraged by the results at the end of the day. Right? So we have biomedical scientists here. We have food nutritionists and dietetics. We have, the other group escapes me, I don't know. Oh, FOST, food science and technology. Actually, I think they are the group that we have 2 of them. Why economics? I ask that because it's a question that I used to ask myself quite a lot when I was in the university and we could be given a course that may not be so apparent or apparently relevant to my course. And it's a course that we use, and it's a question that I ask myself very, very many times. And you can be sure that some of the answers, I just got them when I enrolled for my PhD studies about 4 or 5 years ago. So sometimes it takes that long for you to see the relevance in some of these things, but it does not really detract from the fact that your department or your faculty, in their wisdom, will have seen it necessary for you to at least have some appreciation of economics. And that's basically what I hope this introductory topic to handle. So I'll put my video off. I think you people, you have seen how ugly I am. So let me not distract you too much over the same. Let's get to the course proper. 8 topics. Expect to see 8 topics. And I just wish to take you through those 8 topics very, very quickly. Of course, introductory, as with any other area of human endeavor, you want Douglas Maina, you are writing on your screen. You are not helping us. I want to stop writing. The beauty of Zoom is that it will tell me who the person is. And normally what I normally do is that if you insist, I just get you out of the class. And the beauty of Zoom is that we have the means to do that. So avoid as much as possible from writing, because what you are doing is you are detracting not only me as a lecturer, but you're also detracting everybody. So what is economics? How did economics develop, right? What are the key concepts in economics? Circular flow of income will be part of this introductory concept, just getting to know or to have a feel of what economics is at the end of the day. And it will be the only non-micro or macro topic that we shall do. The other ones, and you shall see the reason as to why that will be the case, will basically be very biased towards either one. I will be talking about a macroeconomic topic or a macroeconomic topic at the end of the day. So the next 4 topics will be theories, and they'll be belonging to what that branch of economics that shall be defining shortly, that we shall be calling microeconomics. So if you have the question what microeconomics is, I can imagine and I believe that shall be answered in very short order within the next few minutes, literally. So demand theory, the relationship between price and demand, right? And you shall see this, shall be using those 2 letters quite a lot, P and QD. Theory of the farm, we shall now be getting from the consumer side to the producer side, the relationship between costs incurred by farms and the relationship between inputs and outputs incurred by the farm, right? Consumer theory, when you are buying something, when you go to the shop and you buy something, you buy it with what objective? There's something that you are aiming at maximizing, that which we shall be referring to as utility, simply the ability of a good or a service to satisfy a need. And lastly, shall be talking about now market structures, right? How markets are structured, how markets are formed, and which is the most efficient markets, and for what reason, which are the most inefficient markets, and for what reasons, from an economic perspective, of course. Okay, so those ones will be our 4 micro topics or micro level topics, after which the next 3 will belong to that part of economics that we call macroeconomics. And as I said, we shall be defining these things in very, very short order. So you'll just allow me to keep you in suspense, so to speak, for a little bit longer. Inflation. Right now we are talking about inflation, and right now the world, we are all about inflation. Bei ya mafuta imepanda, bei ya unga imepanda. Serikali saidia. Can serikali saidia? You can see that we have just had a changeover in government in the last few weeks, and yet you can see even the language of kusaidia is changing, whereby it used to be tukiingia tutafanya. Right now, you can now see crusades being arranged in the State House. Now we are asking for God intervention, because these things are not easy. They're never easy as the way you see people presenting them during campaigns. And personally, I'm happy. This is the first campaign I just sat out totally. I said, whoever wins, wins. Whoever loses, loses. Sikutaka inisumbue. Because all these people are con men. And you can quote me. Anyway, right? You can now see now, because now the reality of governing is coming in, you can see the language changing. And I personally, I'm not surprised, right? Because I know that's just the lot of the people we call politicians. Unemployment. Vijana wanasema hawana kazi. What are the causes? What are the consequences? And how can we minimize, if not totally eradicate, what we call unemployment? We shall basically be talking about this. National income accounting. How do we, when you hear the government talk about this, has been that statistic that they have been quoting. We are collecting 5 billion, right? I think a month. Is it a month or a day? I think they are talking about a day. Yes. Inatumika aje, and out of this 5 billion tunafanya nini? Tunapatia sijui watu wa deni about 3.5 billion, right? How do we account for it? When we talk about things like gross domestic product, you normally read about these things in the newspaper without sometimes fully appreciating what they are. Hopefully, when we get there, inshallah, we shall basically get to appreciate what it's all about. And actually, the example that I've given about 5 billion a day is actually more appropriate to the last topic, monetary and fiscal policy. How does the government influence the supply of money, right? How does the government collect taxes? And how do they, when they say that the tax rate is set 30%, how do they come by that particular an amount of money? And so on and so forth. So as I said, those will be our 8 topics. Expect 2 cuts. I think I'll give them online, but as I told you, our class reps on Thursday, I'm a Democrat. So it's upon you to say, maybe you miss your lecturer too much. Let's have a sit-in cut so that you can see whether it's a ghost or something. Or maybe let's have an assignment. Let's do it online. Let's submit it online, as the case may be. That's one thing that I leave out for you to really decide, and shall have a discussion when the time comes for it. I worship at the altar of class interactions. Okay. I normally actually literally beseech my classes to interact as much as possible. So I'll always be offering times for people to ask questions. Kisikia umepotea, don't be shy. Shyness wachia watu wa high school. Right now in the university, there are no right answers, there are no wrong answers. Nobody has the right answers, even me. There's just a chance that I just know just that little bit more about economics more than you. But I can still learn from you. So let's please interact. I'll be giving chances for people to ask questions. I normally feel very hurt sometimes when I mark and I get somebody getting an E. And maybe the only thing that I can console myself is maybe he never attended the classes, because I don't understand with these opportunities that we offer and the resources, the course outline, the resource book, slide presentation, which are already provided to you via WhatsApp platform. I'm one person who does not really understand somebody really getting an F out of this course, because everything that will be taught will be set purely out of that which I have taught. And normally I'm not in a habit of second guessing my students. I'll always give you whatever I've given out. At the end of the day, it's only fair for you. So I expect that those things, as you can see them there, have already been given to you by your class reps. Course outline, resource book, slide presentation. I sent them a link on Thursday, and I trust that they already shared that link with you guys. So if not, maybe you can engage me. What you can see on the screen is just not really economics, but it's more a Mubaba kind of advice, because I'm told that nowadays I'm not a young person, I'm Mubaba. So we are normally there to give advice sometimes. And this is basically the essence of what university is all about. Don't expect me to just vomit words every lecture. ama niwapatia notes tayari ambao mko nayo, muone ni kama sasa hiyo ni substitute of what you should be having. At the end of the day, it should be all about making you think, making you doubt, allow you to communicate effectively to your peers and to other stakeholders. Most importantly, actually, this is actually the essence of what education is. Questioning, learning from mistakes, and most importantly, at the end of the day, even with all that, you will hopefully be having fun in your learning. I can see somebody chatting. I hope it's not that I'm not being heard. No, somebody is just heard. Thought that Mubaba quote is very interesting. It's okay, which means that you can hear, right? This essence of university education, and I normally give this simply because I know I'm teaching people who are now in the university for the first time. I think some of you have been in the university for maybe a year or two. If you have not really gotten the essence of what university is, please, this is a very, very good quote to have. And maybe the function of universities are changing, but the philosophy of university will never change, because at the end of the day, when you graduate, we always hopefully meet the hope as a university that you have all these critical skills to go do good to humanity at the end of the day. Doubting, thinking, communicating, questioning, and of course, learning from your mistakes, most importantly, having fun in your learning. So this is just an advice. I think there's also another advice here that I'll not really go through, but you have these slides. If you don't have them, maybe you'll have them. I'll post them up at the end of the day. So let's get now to what the basis of what economics is. And it's always good in the university to actually appreciate the root of the name of a word. You saw lawyers 1 month ago talking Latin very, very carelessly at the Supreme Court. And for us non-lawyers, we always think that, oh, we are missing something. But the truth is that actually modern knowledge from the Renaissance, Renaissance is just the rebirth in knowledge for those who did a bit of history in high school, was Latin based. If I would have been in the university 200, 300 years ago, 400 years ago, I will not be using English. I'll be using Latin. So you'll find that most of the disciplines that actually emerged, or modern variants of discipline that emerged out of the Renaissance period, normally will have quite a significant part of their jargon. And if not the jargon, at least even the naming of those disciplines are being Latin-based or being Greek-based, because those were the two language of instructions in Europe. And so it is the case that in economics, we were lucky to have the Greek alternative, right? And this was coined by a Greek philosopher called Xenophon, who literally defined economics as simply household management. Very simply like that. The management of the household. And if you think about it very critically, you'll basically appreciate how critical this is, because at the end of the day, the basic unit of society is the household, that which we call the family. And if you manage this well, society prospers mostly. So whether you shall be talking about micro or macro, you'll actually be pleased to note that at the end of the day, once we have covered this, of course, the society will have been taken care of very, very well. Let's now get to the definition of it, right? What is economics? And you know, the funny thing is that these are words I trust that all of you, without fail, will have heard of, right from long time ago. Really, sometimes without really sitting down for a minute and appreciating what the meaning of that word is. And the truth also is that there are no agreed definition of economics. Hata hii ambayo nawapatia, kutatokea mwanauchumi fulani atakuja na aseme, mbona mmeacha hii, mbona mja include hii, mbona mjaweka hii, and so on and so forth. But having said that, this is perhaps the most complete. It was given 90 years ago, you can see, 1932. When I used to teach it, actually, the first time it used to be what, 70-something years ago. You can now see we are talking about 90 years now. Tunazeeka. And please, before I even continue, maybe I would wish to even encourage you people to use the chat function. For those maybe who might not be very comfortable sharing their thoughts, can always put your questions at any time under the chat function. So let's unpack this definition. And you will see that I'll take care to underline some, and some of them have already been highlighted for me. So I'll not really even underline them, maybe just kidogo, hapo na hapo na hiyo. That economics is a science that studies human behavior. So we are not dealing with animals. We are not dealing with non-inanimate objects. We are very, very clear that economics belongs to only one species, Homo sapiens, and the behavior of the same. A science that studies human behavior as a relationship between ends. Okay, ajira, for example. And scarce means which have alternative uses. Okay. We like this definition from an economics point of view because of its conciseness. It says very much using very little. And that's why arguably it is perhaps the most widely accepted definition. Not the universally accepted, but widely accepted. Economics, I normally liken it to a church called Anglican. If you think about Anglicans and Catholics vile walifanya masi yao last week, Sunday, ndio itafanywa kesho, na itafanywa hivyo the whole world. Almost word for word sometimes. But in Anglican, there is a little bit of democracy. And that's actually what economics is, because we allow people to have different views, different standpoints. So what does this definition mean? It means, and you have to be very, very careful about the words that I have highlighted. We are here because of one word. Scarcity. Without that word, I have no right really engaging you on anything as a lecturer. And you have no right doing anything called Introduction to Economics. We are all here, whether you're a food scientist, whether you're a food nutritionist, whether you're a biomedical scientist, you are all here because of that one word. that the resources that you use have that important property of scarcity. So that whether you're a nutritionist telling somebody, oh, kula hii, kunywa hii, ama kula in this ratio, whether you're a food scientist saying that maybe the milk must contain these nutrients and this is how to ensure that those nutrients are in the milk, for example. Whether you're a biomedical scientist, I don't know what you people you do too much, so you will advise me maybe in the chat. But I know you normally do use a lot of microscopes, right? And if you use a lot of microscopes, then one can argue that maybe there could even be scarcity of the same at some level. But maybe you're talking about even those pathogens and maybe even how to ameliorate them. Maybe even when you talk about COVID, I think you had something to do about it. Okay. So we exist because of that. We deal with goods that have that relationship of being scarce, and then being scarce, we are forced now to plan on their use. Scarcity is as opposed to a word called ubiquity. If something is everywhere, for lack of a better way to define it, let me just use that. We talk about it being ubiquitous. Think about air. Utasikia watu wakipigania vitu vingi dunia hii. Lakini at least as at 2022, sijasikia mtu akipigania hewa hii ambayo tunavuta, hii ambayo Mungu ametupatia. But get sick, go to a hospital, and being put in an oxygen tank. In Kenya, I think per 1 hour, I think I had an invalid. Sometimes we were paying about 45,000 an hour some time back. So you can imagine, for a day, you're almost paying $1 million just for him to breathe. Okay. If the resources you are using were ubiquitous, there will be no economics for you to read. I can assure you of that. But because all of you are dealing with the goods that have that property of being scarce, leading us to make plans of how to use them, planning for them, then it stands to reason that economics becomes a very, very important subject area for you to at least have an appreciation of. I normally ask my students, what is a science? But I guess this time I'll not ask it. I've asked it too many times. But maybe kwa changamoto yenu, you just go, you guys, in your free time, and you can actually, you'll want to define what a science is. But bottom line, economics is a science. I'll give you 2 other definitions. A person by the name, I believe, McConnell, about 20 years ago, gave a good definition. And I like it because it introduces a certain theme, okay, that shall be making use of very much in our theories. That is the optimization or the maximization of certain objectives. So McConnell defined economics as a social science concerned with the efficient use of resources that are limited or scarce. Very important. So it actually gives us that idea that economics is all about maximizing on these scarce resources. And I love this definition for that reason. A social science, it doesn't just say science, but it actually further specifies this as a social science concerned with the efficient use of limited or scarce resources to achieve maximum satisfaction of human material wants. I'll give you the last definition. It's always good to have what 3 also, so that you can at least appreciate the breadth of this thing or this animal that your department has been so rude as to introduce to you. Alphonse Muturi is saying, rada lesson iko poa to collect kasonge. Mimi sheng yangu ni ya 20 years ago, so somebody will need to interpret that for me at some point in the class. Why do I love this definition that was given more than 100 years ago? It is because it places you people, wherever you are, whether you're in Egerton, whether you are in Mushie, whether in Nakuru, whether in Meru. Hujafa hujaumbika, Waswahili walisema. Lakini kama umeumbika wewe, basi you are an economist, whether you like it or not. Sio tafadhali. You are an economist. Question becomes whether you've been making maximum decisions insofar as economics is concerned. Because this definition, given by one of the most important 19th century economists, Alfred Marshall, actually places all of us in this field, the study of mankind in the ordinary business of life. Hata tunaweza iachia hapo. From what you took in the morning for breakfast. When we had a tuck shop, there I think you had more than one choice most of the time. But you choose to maybe take loaf of bread. Kuna mandazi, kuna chapati, kuna hizo vitu vingine. Kuna wale anapenda chai, kuna wale anapenda uji, kuna wale anapenda coffee. Right? What does your money allow you to take for breakfast, for lunch, for supper? Very important questions. It examines that part of individual and social action most closely connected with the attainment and with the use of the material requisites of well-being. So those are 3 definitions, and in those 3, if there was a way for you to combine all of them, you begin to appreciate what economics is all about at the end of the day. So as I said, there is never one definition that is complete in defining economics. There'll always be a critic to critique it, because that's their work. But as I said, combine these 3, you'll begin to have an understanding of economics. Why is economics a science? Science is all about proofing. Deal with proofs. Anything that's a science, I don't know nowadays. I think personally, I think the last important point I had with 844 was more than 25 years ago. So I cannot really say what is happening in the school system, even with this CBC. So I'm not very sure whether you people, you did sciences and up to what level, but I know you did them. And biologies, chemistry, physics, the ones that you did in high school, you know, everything is all about experimenting. What do we call it in this higher level? Call it empiricism. That it must be that anything that is admitted as part of a theory, whether you shall talk about theory of demand, theory of the consumer, theory of the farm, market theory, and any other theory that is in economics, it has to pass the test of empiricism. And what does empiricism means? It must be that we are able to observe. It must be that we are able to measure those phenomena. So there's that quote that was given by Professor Feynman, I think a year ago or 2 years ago. I just brought it up as part of a tweet that I saw, and I thought it was very, very powerful. It doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is. It doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with the experiment, it is wrong. I think biomedical scientists will agree with me on this. First people, you are scientists. Even fun people, you're scientists. You'll know this. In that simple statement is the key to science. And even us as economists, we say that it must be that you are able to measure. It must be that you are able to observe. What shall we be talking about? The relationship between price and demand. Okay. We shall be talking about the relationship between inputs and outputs. Right? We shall be talking about the relationship between what else? What else will we cover? Yeah, utility. Bundles of goods and the utility. It must be that we are able to measure this. At the point at which we are not able to measure, shida inaanzia hapo, and we are saying we are no longer being scientific. Maybe we are being intuitive, we are doing anything else, but we are not scientific. So economics is rightly a science for that very, very reason. We normally have these debates with the pure scientists, your colleagues, the biologists, then the chemists and the physicists. They normally say, no, you people, you are joking. Cannot be a science. But us, we are very, very sure that we are a science. Somebody has even given that in here, Alphonse, and I think you have captured it very well in the charts over the same, what a science is. Maybe for some of you might want to aim about it. Who are the participants in the economic game? We call them economic agents, right? Or economic actors, or just, we even borrow a word that was used, I think some of you saw in chemistry, in history in high school, that word being homo economicus, right? The rational person, the rational, in books they write the rational man, but nowadays we are a bit gender sensitive, so you'll always hear me talking about the rational person. And who is this rational person? A rational person is a person who makes his economic decisions with only one objective: the maximization or the optimization of his or her self-interest. Right? And what are these self-interests? A consumer will be assumed to be making his consumer choices with only one objective. What we'll be talking about being utility maximization. And on the other hand, a producer will be assumed to have only one objective, that will be profit maximization, for example. Just taking the example of consumers and producers, because that is basically a broad theme that shall be revisiting very many times over the course of this unit. So you're only rational only to that extent. And that's why niliwapatia changamoto when I was giving you the second definition, whether you are an economic being or not, because I was just basically arguing that you can only be an economic being only to the extent that you are able to maximize your self-interest. Okay? So when you say nimeenda na nikanunua mkate, na tukikuuliza kama ungenunua mandazi ungesikia vyema kuliko vile umenunua mandazi, Na kama hiyo mandazi was your best choice, then you're a rational person. In not so many words because of that. Umenunua kile ambacho roho ilipenda. Right? And so on and so forth. So who are these actors? Can be an individual level. That's why I said all of us, we have made economic decisions. So then kuna mtu amekuwa university ambayo at least at some level, you've not really made a choice, a conscious choice that can be argued to be economic in nature. What to consume, what hairstyle to have, what dress to wear, right? Those are economic choices. They might not seem so because sometimes they are more or less automatic in us, but they are. And I'll have the whole 2 months coming to prove to you that they are indeed economic choices. Households also make economic choices. What to buy in bulk. Wakati wanaenda budgeting, tunaenda kwa supermarket, and you decide that this is our menu for this week, so we have to buy these ingredients, right? Which schools to take our kids, okay? Unaona saizi kuna hiyo tetesi ya CBC and all that. Farms also make these decisions, what to buy as inputs, what to produce, what markets to cultivate. Government also is a very, very critical, actually in most economics, except I think 2 in the world. Governments happen to be very, very critical economic actors. How much to tax? What to buy? Which road to be put where? Which flyover to be put where and for what reason? Na unaona hapa Kenya kuna kuanga na hiyo tetesi all the time, right? Why is Nyanza developing and yet they are oppositionists? Watu wa Central pia walisema ya kuwa Uhuru, hata kama umetutengenezea hii, no, we are voting our own person. Those are economic decisions in a way. And that's why actually, for the longest time, actually economics was called political economy. Okay, because you can never make these arguments without infusing a bit of politics in it. Right, the international sector, what we call the import, the export sector. The totality of this is what can be thought as rational people making economic decisions. From an economic point of view, we hope they are making decisions that serve to maximize their objectives at the end of the day. Okay. So resume, sometimes it refuses to wrap, so I have to do that quite a lot. 2 main branches of economics, and this is why I promised that I didn't want to define it at that point because I knew that I shall be defining it. Economics is, if it was a tree, it will be argued to be comprising 2 main branches. I was a poor artist. So you can assume that that's a tree. And if that's a tree, economics is basically divided into 2, micro and macro. So you must not think about them as 2 separate parts. No, they feed into the whole of what we call, all the totality or the sum, if you like, of what we argue to be what we refer to as economics. Right? So let's define them. Microeconomics, the trick is with those prefixes. You think about micro will always give you an idea of something small, something tinier comparatively as compared to the whole. And I think the example that I normally like giving, apart from this one of of a tree, I normally like giving the example, which I think is more appropriate, of what we call a cake. And if we have a cake, I was a poor artist, so I'll please be forgiven even before I make these very egregious errors of drawing sometimes. We normally eat cakes through what we call sectors. Unaikata hivi, unasema wacha nikule hiyo, ile imebaki nitaikula baadaye. And if you think about the totality of this cake as being the sum of what we call economics, this sector will actually comprise the micro part. Because you are just looking at a certain part of economics rather than the whole of it. Okay. So whenever we are talking about individual decisions, household decision, farm decisions, especially these first three, and whenever we are arguing in those tiny bits, for lack of a better word, one can argue that actually we are dealing with what we are referring to as the micro part of economics. What did you eat in the morning? What are you wearing? What's the hairstyle you are wearing? What are the shoes you are wearing? Will you pay fees this week or next week, and for what reason? What risk do you stand to gain by not paying this week as opposed to last week? And so on and so forth. That's micro. As opposed to some actually subject areas in economics like unemployment, when you talk about inflation, when you think about monetary policy, when you talk about fiscal policy, these are subject areas that can only be appreciated if the whole cake is eaten. Or if we appreciate the totality of the economics rather than a small bit of it. And that's why you'll find that actually in some of these subject areas, you will not go to the VC here, Kibwage, and tell him that, please, I'm not able to afford unga, please do something. No, Kibwage will tell you, no, I don't have the power. Go talk to Ruto. Why go talk to Ruto? Because Ruto now is the president. He's the father of us all. So he's the only one who can actually look at the overview, what we call the bird's eye view of the economy, right? And actually say, maybe if we can effect this policy, and you can see he started well by removing the subsidies last week. As economists, we clapped. We said yes. Jaden, actually, I don't know whether it is what he's drinking. He was drinking too much. And sometimes I wonder where that guy did economics, because his 10 years were not that something to write home about in terms of economics. You know, sometimes you can see where somebody is coming from, but some of the economics choices he made sometimes had us scratching our heads. Okay. Right? Because you can only appreciate them in their entirety, when the entirety of the economics, what we call when the sum or the aggregate of economic agents are taken into the consideration. If you consider the whole cake rather than just a sector of a cake or a pizza, for example. Okay, so micro, individual economic agents, but macro, the aggregate or the sum of the economic agents. How did economics develop? Okay. I normally used to only teach the modern. But from last semester, I said no. Since man, actually, arguably, since we started forming society, right? Since we started collaborating as people, since we started having families, there has been some economics in our decision making, even from the hunter and gathering perspective. So it was only fair that we appreciate the totality of it. So maybe I'll spend the next few minutes just talking very, very briefly about these three eras, but I shall concentrate at the end on the last one, because that especially is where we are. So we can think about the economic development or the thoughts basically happening in three eras: the ancient, the medieval, and what we call the modern. Mohammed, stop writing. You are attempting to write, but it's not coming out. But I know, I fear that you shall start writing when I'm just engaged into my lecture. Okay. You know, even before Renaissance, we had very deep thinkers. The age of the great philosopher. And I believe it's not only in economics that we talk about Aristotle. The first time I think I heard about the name Aristotle, it was Form 1 in biology, if my memory serves me right. So you can see that these are people who have had a lot of influence in most disciplines, and even economics is part of them when you talk about them asking the critical questions. Perhaps the most ancient of economic thinkers, and his student was called Plato. Xenophon, you can actually see him being the one actually who coined the word oikonomia for us. Okay. And that's basically when the economies were simple. I think societies, even when we think about people coming in, having families and all that, the main ideas or question then are not these lofty ideas we deal with right now, but it was just a case of answering. And we're still answering this question if you think about it critically. Should property be left in private or public lands? Because from then, we are talking about before Christ, or what I hear people calling about before common era nowadays. We are still thinking about this even in Kenya right now. Okay, so that was the main idea that was influencing the ancient philosopher, and they argued quite a bit. I will not go to the detail of it, but just leaving that maybe as a point of curiosity to you. Okay. And then, of course, came the new age of discovery, the medieval era. Hapa ndio sasa most disciplines hata ukisoma their history, see economics peke yake. Most disciplines is now the point at which now they started coming into a reckoning. We used to have these universities, even the Timbuktu here in Mali, Alexandria in Egypt, even you went to Greece, they had those universities then, coming up with new knowledge, rise in Christianity and even Islam, okay, which arguably from a Eurocentric perspective had a lot of thought on medieval economic thinking. And you found that most of the thinking, most of the argument were actually Christian, and in some context, Muslim-led. You know, sometimes I have to be very, very honest and say that maybe when I'm reading these texts, I'm reading it from a Eurocentric, and by so doing Christian perspective. But it's quite possible that also there was a lot of Islamic thought into this. Okay. So canon law or church law led most economic thinking in the medieval era. And there were two main doctrines, what we call usury and the just price. Usury simply means that you can see even Islam has taken it up perhaps more than us, of the so-called Christians. And you can see when you talk about Islamic banking, even up to now, they are still practicing what you talk about usury, that if somebody lends you money, it must not be returned in form of interest. Okay. So there is a way in which Sharia law or Sharia banking or Islamic banking does it, such that at the end of the day, you end up not having interest on whatever you lend out. There was also the concept of just price, that the price that you charge for any good or any service has to be just. So you just take that price that is just enough to return to you the cost that maybe you incurred in making that good or service. Hata kama ni profit ikuwe ingine that can be understood. Capitalists came out and destroyed these doctrines, and nowadays we don't hear about them too much, except in the context of maybe Islamic banking and all that. As I said, most of medieval thinkers were basically church influenced. And when you talk about people like Thomas Aquinas, Basil of Caesarea, John Chrysostom, Ambrose of Milan, St. Augustine, Peter Damian, these are actually people who are actually prominent Christians. Thomas Aquinas, I believe Catholics still consider him a saint, even up to now. Okay. So charity was the driving force of economic thought at the medieval era. All your property is in heaven. Don't consider what is happening here on earth. Mali yetu iko binguni. Right? That was maybe the main driving force at the end of the day. And then, of course, came the modern era. And in the modern era, I shall quickly go through the three schools of thought: the classical, the Keynesian, the neoclassical, and there's one that we are actually suspecting. And we've been suspecting now for about 15 years that maybe by the time I retire, in about 15 to 20 years, we shall not be talking about three schools of thought, but we shall be talking about maybe the fourth one. And I shall give you a reason as to why that is the case. But let's consider the first one, the classical economists. Where did it begin? Right? A book that was written in the same year that America declared independence, 1776, is considered to be the book that actually ushered in the modern economic era. 1776. Or the era of classicists in economics. If you go to the library, you'll get a book called, I think normally abbreviated to Wealth of Nations. Whether it is First Library, whether it is the main library, or maybe even if you go to the internet. It was written by somebody who is regarded nowadays as the father of modern economics, Adam Smith. He was a Scot. Remember, the Queen died in Scotland 2 weeks ago or so. So even this guy was a Scot, a man from Scotland. And in this book, he wrote quite a lot that served to crystallize modern thought. in economics. I shall just give you two or so thoughts that he wrote therein. Gave us what we call the factors of production as these three: land, labor, and capital. For those of you who did business, I know you are taught a fourth one. But there's a reason as to why, even up to now, even me having done economics now, I think 20 years plus, I still consider these three as the only factors of production. And it really goes back to how we define economics. If we define economics as a science, and if we say that for every acre of land shall be given a certain amount and shall call it rent as reward to that factor, if you do for me some work, I shall give you wages at a certain rate or a certain percentage, shall call this reward wages. If I hire a tractor from you, I shall give you some consideration, and we call this consideration interest. How will you define and how can you justify from an empirical point of view the fact that we talk about an entrepreneurship as a factor of production and whose rewards are profits? By the way, in economics, we use pi, the one we've been using since class 3 in mathematics, to denote profits. Sometimes you'll just see me writing that in brief. Please note, that is what I mean whenever I'll be abbreviating this. So you can see for the first three, we are able to actually infer empirically that you gave me 1 acre, I gave you, say, 2,000 shillings. So if I want 2 acres, of course, just times 2, I'll give you 4,000. Kuna shida. Labor, you worked for me for 30 days and we agreed every day I give you 1,000 shillings. So for 30 days, I owe you 30,000. And you can document it and we say, fine. Capital, I gave you my tractor to use and we agreed that maybe you shall be paying me daily or maybe you shall be paying by acreage. And if it goes 1 acre, maybe you'll pay me 5,000. If I have 50 acres, of course, that is times 50. I need to pay you 2,500. But for entrepreneurship, we come to an intellectual dilemma. How is it that if last year, if I take the example of 2 companies, let me just remove that. Safaricom, I think, had a profit of about, it was less than the other year, I think it was 68 billion. And Equity, let's say Equity had, for example, just a hypothetical number, 34 billion. So twice the amount of Safaricom. Can we say that Safaricom has twice the entrepreneurship ability to Equity? Can we? And if we can, what if next year in 2023, maybe it is now Equity to make 68 billion and Safaricom to make, say, 34 billion, because these things happen in business. Will we say that now Safaricom has halved his entrepreneurship ability to equity. So you find from an from an empirical point of view, entrepreneurship is a very tricky factor to deal with. So we normally tend to ignore it as economists, and we say we are only comfortable with the first three because there is no way in which one can really empirically measure entrepreneurship. There is no way that has been discovered, arguably, that one can do that. And that's why I was just showing you, and I hope I have convinced you that only the first three, as given by Adam Smith, will feature as our factors of production. So if you are taught differently, that's the reason why in economics, even me, you'll find me really relying on the first three: land, labor, and capital. Smith also encouraged us to be selfish. It's okay to be selfish. Nothing bad with that. Of course, Christians will tell us, jali mwenzako, and even Muslims. I think you have also zakat as part of your responsibilities, religious-wise. But Smith came in and said, to hell with all of us. It is okay when person is pursuing his objectives, economic objectives, in a selfish manner. When somebody puts up a tuck shop where you buy your bread, if you go to JCR and you find those many shops that are there, I'd wish you to go and even ask them, why did they just put up the shops? And if somebody will tell you that because nimeokoka or something like that, please, if you have some water, just throw them that water or something, because they'll be lying. Our motives in advancing economically has and will always be selfish motives. What in literature we politely refer to as narrow self-interest. So Smith said that if markets are competitive, right, even though you put up a cobbler shop, a supermarket, a mtumba selling point, yeah, milk selling point, everybody does that just to make that quick buck, a profit. So by so doing, our economic interests are, as though by magic, what actually Smith called the invisible hand, the economic interest of the society is advanced. Actually, Smith said, you can see that quote there, it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker, because these were the main people, these are the main business people then, I believe, that we expect our dinner. But they do that, they butcher animals, butcheries, they brew our Taskas, our Conyagis, our Hennessy, our Glenfiddich, right? They make our Broadways, our Ken Blessed, our Elliots. I don't know which other brands are there nowadays for bread. Motivated purely by the profit motive. In some contexts, we find it being called the profit motive. It's a selfish interest, but as if by magic, the economic interest of the society is advanced. Okay. Who are the other notable classical economists? We had Malthus, who was an Anglican priest, came up with a theory of population and food production, says that Food production grows. What did he say? He said that food production, whereas it grows or it follows an arithmetic production. Okay. If you can remember your maths, you had what you call arithmetic progression, but population will always grow geometrically. And you can imagine the effect of this, that at any other point, population will be growing at a faster rate than the food that is available. So inevitably, there is a time that famine must ensue in any society, and famine will serve as a means by which population decreases. So once population decreases, it matches food production, and then the cycle begins again. Very, very interesting theory at the end of the day. Okay. David Ricardo gave us the basis for trading with Uganda or Russia or the US, what we call the theory of comparative advantages. Basically, what he said is a country or an economy will only produce that which they have a comparative advantage, or that good or service that they can produce at a lower economic opportunity cost. And then now they can trade with other nations also producing goods or services at a lower opportunity costs. I normally don't like going to the depth of this simply because right by now we have not even encountered the concept of opportunity cost. Keynesian lasted until the 1930s. And what happened is that in the year 1929, something happened that had not been anticipated by economists then. There was a crash, a market crash. And that was actually indicated by the foremost market in the world, what nowadays is known as the New York Stock Exchange, crashing. And by it crashing, what happened is that it actually brought into play a concept that economists had not contemplated until then. You know, in classical economists, they used to have a saying. Then that saying used to be this: supply creates on demand. Yes, write this somewhere. If you have it, it might come somewhere. And we call that Say's law, from an economist called Say. Okay. Supply creates on demand. That a cobbler just needs to produce shoes. A baker just needs to produce bread and other pastries. A brewer just needs to produce the Tuskers and the Hennessy's, etc. of those worlds. That's just, your work is just to produce. The market will always be there. Right? Supply creating its own demand. But then, what happens that with this market crash, right? This market crash that I'm talking about here of the New York Stock Exchange, this law was disabused, right? is almost the equivalent of Pope Francis coming in and telling us right now, and please, I'm not blaspheming, but I'm just giving it as an example. There is no God. It was the equivalent of that, right? Somebody, you can imagine an authority like that, or an, I think they call him the Ayatollah of Iran, a Muslim authority, saying something as profound as this. It was equivalent to that because economists believed in this law so very much that when the market crash happened in the 1929, it was a case that there was a very, very big crisis in the economic space. How do we explain this? We have always believed that the producers only needed to supply, and that's actually what we have encouraged them to do. And then all of a sudden, the goods that were being produced were not finding markets, right? Because that actually was the main cause of the crash. Farms are producing goods, goods are not finding markets. So it needed somebody to come in to explain and to provide solutions, economic solutions. And that man was a man or a gentleman, the most influential 20th century economist, a man by the name John Maynard Keynes. He was a Briton. He was a genius of sorts. And in the year 1936, he wrote a book which sought to explain the causes of farms not being able to satisfy markets simply because of lack of demand. And you can imagine that farms will have employed people, right? These people are expecting a salary. But because farms are not having markets, we're not basically having markets for their produce, they are not able to get salaries to pay these workers. So what do? They have to fire them. More or less what is happening in the world right now, but maybe on an arguably smaller scale or an equal scale, I don't know. So he wrote this book that came to be known as the General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money. He sought to explain especially what was wrong with the economy then. And he said this, this actually in a sentence, what he argued to be happening, that the New York Stock Exchange must crash because firms were not really maximizing on their profits. Some of them actually were hemorrhaging losses simply because you've invested in a certain production line, but there are no markets for these goods or services. So you lay off people. And that's actually what brought about what came to be known as the high labor market unemployment. In classical economists, because of things like invisible hand and all that, we said, this self-corrects. But it only self-corrects when there is effective demand for those goods. If there is no demand, right, the self-correcting does not happen. Okay. So he basically said that actually the cause of the Great Depression, the Great Depression was actually lasted between 1929 up to the end of Second World War. And actually one can argue that it's actually the war that actually kind of corrected things a bit by providing a certain line, the military line, whereby companies were able to go in, produce military wear, and realize profits, employ people in those factories. He also gave us a framework, a very, very important framework that we shall be using in especially the macro part of this course, what shall be referring to as the aggregate demand, aggregate supply framework. I will not define it then because I know I shall be defining it later. But for those who might be curious, C, consumption, I, investment, G, government, X and M is export and imports respectively. And in the aggregate supply side, consumption, savings, taxes, exports, imports. For those who might be curious that mbona mwalimu hajatufunza hii, that's basically what that means. We shall be covering it when we shall be doing inflation and unemployment at some point down the line. Okay. So Keynesian actually was the brain school of thought from the end of Second World War until the early 70s. It is the shortest lasting. If you can see, I've given those times here. Classical economists lasted the whole of what? 200 years? Almost 200 years, almost, I think almost 170 years. This one only lasted about a generation, only about 25 years. Right? And then we came now to the neoclassical economist era. That's basically what I wish to very, very quickly detail before we go to question and answer, and then we can see whether you can proceed with the lesson. Okay. What Keynes actually argued is that the cure for this Great Depression is for the government to come in the economy and influence things in a big way. Nelly Muiruri, you are writing, I don't know why. Stop writing. He said that because classical economists had left things to the private sector, whenever there are economic turmoils, the government should come in and stimulate the economy and get the economy going. And that's why you find that actually during this era, there were a lot of infrastructural expansion, especially in America, and in a certain smaller way in Europe. Because Keynes said, no, we have been doing it wrong. We've been ignoring government, but government matters at the end of the day. Government must be allowed to come in and rough things up. Right? So the 40s, 50s, 60s, there was that. Even when we got independence as Kenyans, that's the mindset that Kibaki and other economists came up with, that yeah, government has a role in the economy. Until the year 1967. And what happened in the year 1967? There are these wars that were fought in the Middle East. There are these wars that were fought in the Middle East. From 1967, don't mind the title. 1967, we had a war called the 6 Days War. Yeah, because it was fought only 6 days. To a war that was fought almost exactly 30 years ago, because I know yesterday was the Jewish New Year, what they call Yom Kippur, 1973. And these wars, there were quite a few between those two, had the same premise. In the year 1948, just after the Second World War, a country called Israel came into being. Okay, if you read your Bible, you'll know that when Jesus came, he said, oh, wow, 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 new kingdom and all that. right? Jews also are still waiting for their Messiah. Christians, we already have had our Messiah, apparently, right? But you know that actually sometime after Jesus was Sulubiwa, those who believe he rose from the dead and all that, ascended to heaven, just a short 70 years after that, Jews were chased away from Jerusalem. And for the next 2,000 years or so, they always had that dream that, no, let's go back to our motherland. Let's go back to our motherland. And that had been their dream for long. The reason of Second World War was also had a Jewish dimension whereby Hitler sought to exterminate them. And actually, he tried his best. He killed about 6 million of them during the Second World War. Okay. So in 1948, actually after the World War, because the victors now were the Western Axis, I don't know whether they were the ones called Axis powers and all that, they said, no, the first thing that we need to do is to make sure that Jews have their own homeland. And Jews always preferred the original homeland called Israel. But within these 2,000 years, people had come in and settled in the so-called homeland, the Palestinians, and other Arabs. So if Jews were to have their land, they had to have it at the expense of these people who were to be chased away. And indeed, they were chased away between 1948 and even up to now. They still have those issues because the Palestinians are like, why are you chasing us away? This is our land. We have occupied it for generations. And the Israelites, the Jews are saying, no, this is our ancestral land. So you people, you just need to go and look for your land somewhere. So in the 1967, with the support of other Arab countries, because they were seeing Israel is a very small slice. Even if you look at it in the map, you can almost miss it every time. Very, very small land. Surrounded by very, very big Arab neighbors. If you think about Egypt to the south, think about Saudi Arabia, there is Iran, Iraq, there is Kuwait, there is Lebanon, all of them Arab. So they were like, no, it cannot be that this small, small country called Israel will be talking about it every time. So let's do away with it once and for all. So they went to war. They invaded Israel in 1967. But in 6 days, Israel not only won, but actually they had decimated about 90% of their military capability. So it was a case of whereby a small brother was beating convincingly his or her big brother. If we were to use size as a determination for what was happening. So what happens if you're a big brother and you have been beaten comprehensively by your small brother? You'll make sure that the small brother and the people who are supporting him pay. And that's what the Arabs did. And then I think the Middle East used to control the oil market. So they said the only way we can actually show the world that we are mad about what is happening, the world has not come to support us. We think we have a claim to this Israel. We were supporting a brother, the Palestinians. But because these are not happening, the only way we can punish the world, almost what Putin is doing right now, if you think about it, history repeats itself as it happens, is to strangle the oil market. Before 1967, oil used to be very cheap, very, very cheap. Never used to be a factor. Cheap and readily available. But from 1967, even if you check even our development trends in Kenya, you'll always find the first shock actually tallying with the year 1967. because of this. Arabs said, no, from right now on, oil has to be sold at a premium. Mupende, musipende. And that's what they did. So this thing of Keynes saying the government just needs to go and pour money into the economy and everything will be corrected no longer worked very well, because for the first time, governments like us in Kenya, right? Don't forget that in 1967, we were only 4 years from independence, and we were talking about these three things of kicking out ignorance, diseases, and the third thing, right? So all of a sudden, we didn't have money to do this. We didn't have money to set up schools, right? Or hospitals, or roads, or markets. There was no longer money for this. So the Keynes solution of government coming into the economy no longer worked. And there was a need for another alternative thought. And that's where now neoclassical economists came in. Okay. And that's the era that we are in right now. Although arguably, one can argue that because of hizi misukosuko ambazo tuko nazo kwa nini, and na umeona even the theme, from what? From classical to Keynesian, from Keynesian to neoclassical, there is always some calamity. And that's what I was arguing, that these don't just change for their own sake. There's always some crisis that happens to actually inform this changing in the thought. And because we have had a crisis since 2007, that's why I'm arguing that maybe there's a new school of thought that basically will be anchored in institutions as the driver of economic development, cooking. We still don't have a name for it, but I'm imagining that there's something that is cooking right now. What is neoclassical? Neoclassical basically means that economists actually went and said, no, maybe we were too hasty in dismissing classical era economics. Not all of it is bad. Maybe we can come, adopt it, and actually change a few things. And that's why when we shall be drawing this in chapter 2, you will have neoclassical economists to thank for this, because they're the people who gave us this framework of basically analyzing supply, demand, matrices, and actually the primacy of price set up by the market forces of demand and supply, what we shall be calling either the market price. In some context, we shall just be calling it the equilibrium price. Okay. So we'll have classical, neoclassical economists too. Thank for it, because they're the people who systematize this supply thing and demand thing, market forces of supply and demand. We shall be covering it in chapter 2 in detail. Represent incentives and cost as playing a fundamental role in shaping economic urgent decision making. That when you go and make an economic decision, you kind of weigh the benefits and costs before you make these decisions. So basically a way of just saying that at the end of the day, we are rational beings. We don't just make decisions, economic decisions at a whim, but we actually, there is some deliberate process that goes inside our heads or inside our hearts. I don't know whether economics is a more head or heart or heart head, but there's a process that goes in terms of you arriving at a decision, economic decision at the end of the day. Any questions so far? Let me just check the chats. There is no chats at all. You can raise your hand if you have a question, and I shall just pick you, and maybe you can ask your question. And if I have the answer, I answer. If I don't have the answer, I'll always tell you, we can always revisit it next time. Any questions? Any raised hands? There are no raised hands, so I wonder what the time is. Yeah, I have 9 minutes. Maybe I can just shortly introduce the next thing that then tomorrow we can continue. Somebody has asked, I can see something in the chat. Please repeat the last statement you said. Which statement is that? What was it concerning about? Was that neoclassical? I just said that consumers are rational beings. Maybe that's what this second point represents. I was just talking about or expounding on this. The rationality, and we're just about to basically find out what we mean by rationality in economics. But we're talking about rationality in a word, basically that in all the decisions that we make as economic beings or economic actors, we make them with one intention, the optimization of a certain special economic interest. And maybe let me go to it in detail. Maybe it will bring it out more clearly. We've been talking about the science of economic analysis or economics. Is there an art side of it? Short answer, there is. Okay. We employ these tools in our economic analysis, the science, the theories, models, and all that, but there's also the art. We are normally accused by other sciences as being too much of assumptionists. Right? So I'll give you two assumptions that we normally use in our day-to-day analysis. Assumption of rationality. Hopefully this will clarify what I've just been asked by one of you in the chat. The assumption of rationality basically states that economic actors are rational. That in making economic decisions, we make them with only the objective of optimization or maximization of a certain specific economic interest. And in most cases, we'll always argue that we only have that one, and that only one as an objective. The optimization or the maximization of a certain economic interest. So that taking the example of consumers versus producers, will always be at a point whereby we'll be assuming that in making your consumer decisions, you'll be making them with one and only one objectives. You shall see this in chapter 4. We shall be talking about maximization of a consumer utility function. Don't worry about the maths. Don't let the maths scare you. We are just trying to symbolize that statement up here, whereby we're talking about a consumer having the objective and the only objective of maximizing his utility. Remember, we define this as the ability of a good or service to satisfy a need. But to maximize it subject to some limitation. This is the problem of the reality of life, that you cannot maximize it infinitely. You'll always be limited. In our case, you'll always be limited by our budget. If you have 100 shillings, you can only be able to command goods or services worth that amount. Person who has 1,000 is able to command goods or services worth 1,000 shillings. A million, the same. A billion, a trillion, quadrillion. If there is such kind of money, you are always limited, which means that even the richest amongst us, the Jeff Bezos, is still the richest person. No, it's actually the South African Elon Musk. Even him with his billions, kuna mali inafika hata yeye anainua mikono juu anasema no. Hiyo sana anaachia Mungu. What we call the budget constraint. Okay. At the same time, it will be assumed that producers will be making their production decisions with one and only one objective, the maximization of profits. Okay. What I shall be indicating as pi subscript max. Okay. So, but even him as a producer, he is limited. This is what actually this means. This means subject to. I'm always asked what it means. So let me just preempt that. Subject to factors such as level of technology used and the available inputs to be used in production. And it's a very, very important assumption. I cannot really overemphasize it because absent of these assumptions, majority of what I'll be teaching will fail to make sense at some level. It will simply fail to make sense because if we are to make decisions, we have to make decisions with this assumption that anyway, it might be that there are some consumers that will not be having that as their main objective. There'll be producers that will not be having that as their main objective, maximization of profits. So the only way that even the maths, the quantitatives that shall be doing will begin to make sense is when these assumptions support those mathematics. Second assumption is this Latin phrase, ceteris paribus. And ceteris paribus might appear to be something new, but it is something that you did in mathematics not very long time ago. If you remember this concept of holding all other factors constant. Kuna hiyo hesabu mlikuwa mnafanya, mnaambiwa sijui Kamau aliamuka akalima for this long, right? Tukimuongezea Wanjiko, how long will it take them to make that, to finish that work? And you remember there used to be that rider at the end of the day, that all factors are kept constant, basically meaning that they are working at the same rate, all of them. Ama kama nani alikuwa na work at that rate does not change. In economics, we call that ceteris paribus assumption. The only Latin phrase I'll teach you, we are not like lawyers who try to hide everything under Latin, but this is an important assumption because in most analysis, you'll find that because we are dealing with many variables that affect the same arguments, it is always good to say that whenever I shall be talking about a 1% change in price, for example, leading to say a 3% change in quantity demanded. And yet we know that it's not only price that affects demand. We have other factors like income. We have price of related goods. We have tastes and preferences, right? We have wealth, okay? So we shall be holding these other factors constant in order for this hesabu hapa to remain valid, that they'll be not be changing at the point at which we shall be talking about a 1% change in price, for example, leading to a 3% change in quantity demanded. I can see I have two questions. I believe for Techno BC3, I think I have hopefully cleared your argument. Techno 4.5 is asking, is this neoclassical economics the one used today? Yes. But as I said, I think I've repeated myself more than twice. I suspect as an economist, because we have these calamitous events for the last 15 years, maybe 10 years from now, when we shall be going back to the books, we shall rewrite our books and say that we are not in the neoclassical era anymore. Maybe there's this new school of thought that will be informing our arguments going forward. Okay. Philip Kimani is asking, why did government, treasury bills, and bond rise after election? Elections are periods of uncertainty. Okay. And what businesses prefer, what businesses pray for? Kama kuna miungu ambao huwa tunatoa kafara kwao as economists and as businesses is this thing called certainty. Okay. In an ideal world, businesses want to operate in periods of certainty. Na kama kuna kitu yote ambayo inaleta that UN, uncertainty, businesses will always try to avoid them because it even turns things to be very comfortable prospects to become even riskier prospects. So the short answer to your question is that rise was maybe, what can I call it? A statement of confidence on the election outcome by the business community, because one will imagine that maybe before the election, they had actually feared. And you know, in Kenya, the problem, and that's why tunaambiwa ya kuwa hii siasa inatuumiza, because you find that we invest ourselves too much in politics, that you find that for the first, when the elections do not go our way, we start now violence, start killing each other, we start destroying properties, and who will want his property which he has painstakingly built over time to be destroyed? Your life's work being destroyed. I have a house here in Joro, actually the place I'm teaching from. And for the last 2 election cycles, I've been thinking seriously about selling it off, because I'm like, no, the way I come from, maybe people will just come and say that because your name begins with O, maybe you do not really need to be part of our neighborhood or something. But I was very much encouraged that this time there was no noise from anywhere in Kenya. And maybe that's how we need to go from an economic perspective going forward. In Europe, you hear people, governments changing, but you don't hear people going and killing each other. Until very recently, I think it's because of this Trumpism and the way the world politics is right now. People are just a bit too angry about things more than they should be. So these are the things, Philip Kimani, that actually happens at times, that you find actually our economy not really growing optimally as a result. But this time, I believe we had a pleasant surprise, all of us, whereby the election went on. Despite people's disappointment, I don't believe there was a stone that was thrown in anger in Kisumu or Eldoret. People just celebrated. I never heard of people dying. There's where people used to die even as recently as 2017. So it's a positive thing. And maybe the next time, businesses will come in and say, Kenyans are mature. We don't need to be so afraid about, or to be so uncertain about these election events, because in Kenya, the other thing is that we practice our politics almost for 3 of the 5 years. I wish that actually the next time we can even work until 6 months to the election, or even 3. To end the siasa for 3 months, whoever gets turudi mashambani. It can be a good thing. I hope you answered, Philip Kimani, but in short, businesses abhor uncertainty. And whenever they get a place whereby they can be pleasantly surprised the way they are, you'll always find that one being reflected in that rising in the maybe the price of the bond, especially not bills, but I believe it's the bond. Bills normally are short term, bonds are normally long term, and they normally a good reflector of economic performance in an economy. Is it possible to predict Kenyan economy? Yes, we try. And actually, tomorrow I shall be teaching you about the what? The science of it, of economic analysis. So when you talk about models, when you talk about predictions, when you talk about forecasting, hapo ndio tunakulia kama economists. But of course, all of these are premised on the existing economic theories. We do it. The short answer to that. So thank you, guys. I believe I have taken a bit more of your time. So tomorrow we shall basically begin from where we have ended, maybe considering the marginal analysis, and then we'll go now to the science, and then we shall now basically continue unpacking this course, as the case may be. So have a good evening. Let's meet tomorrow, 10 o'clock.